Hey guys, tonight we transport you to Salem Village, 1692, where the air feels thick with frost and secrets. Picture yourself trudging through muddy lanes, past timber houses with smoke curling from chimneys. The wind carries whispers, neighbors eyeing each other, muttering about curses and strange omens. You're dropped into a world where one wrong move could brand you a witch. And, let's be honest, you probably won't survive this. The tension's real, and survival feels like a long shot. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I love knowing where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe cover with a blanket for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Salem Village, a small Puritan settlement in Massachusetts, where life revolves around faith, hard work, and not stepping on anyone's toes. It's early 1692, and the community's already on edge. The winter's been brutal, crops are failing, and smallpox rumors swirl. You wake at dawn, your breath visible in the chilly air, and haul water from a creaky well. Your hands ache from chopping wood, and your boots sink into the icy mud. Everyone's watching everyone else. Did Goodwife Proctor skip church last Sunday? Why's that stray cat lingering near her door? Suspicion's a currency here, and you're learning fast that trust is scarce. The Puritans believe the devil's always lurking, ready to snatch souls. Church is mandatory, and sermons drone on about sin and Satan's tricks. You sit on a hard pew, trying not to fidget, while the minister warns of witches, people who've supposedly signed the devil's book. It sounds wild, but the fear's real. Historically, witch hunts have flared up in Europe for centuries, with tens of thousands executed. Salem's late to the party, but they're catching up fast. A quirky tidbit? Some folks here think witches fly on broomsticks, a folklore mashup from old world tales. Historians still argue whether this fear was pure religious zeal or something darker, like social control. You're not sure what to believe, but the village's mood is shifting. You notice small things first. A neighbor's cow stops giving milk, and they blame maleficium, evil magic. Someone's child has a fever, and fingers point. You overhear hushed talk about two girls, Betty Paris and Abigail Williams, acting strange, convulsing, screaming, claiming they're bewitched. The village doctor, stumped, says it's supernatural. You're skeptical, but the gossip spreads like wildfire. Could it be the devil? Or, as you might joke today, maybe they just ate some bad rye bread. Moldy grain can cause hallucinations after all. Some scholars still float that theory. You try to keep your head down. Your daily routine is grueling, milking cows, mending fences, praying. But the community's unraveling. The girls' fits get worse, and they start naming names. People they say are tormenting them with magic. You're at the village meeting house when you hear the first accusation. It's Tituba, an enslaved woman in the Paris household. The crowd gasps. You feel a chill, not just from the February cold. Why her? She's an outsider, easy to target. You wonder if you're next. The rules here are murky. Smile too much, you're suspicious. Frown too much, same deal. You're starting to see how fear twists logic. As you walk home, passing fields dusted with snow, you realize Salem's not just a place, it's a pressure cooker. One wrong word could land you in chains. You're no witch, but proving it, that's the trick. For now, you keep quiet, avoid eye contact, and pray no one notices you. Survival means blending in, but even that might not be enough. The whispers are growing louder, and you're right in the middle of it. You're still in Salem Village, 1692, trudging through your daily grind as the whispers of witchcraft grow louder. The muddy paths between houses feel narrower now, like the village itself is closing in. You're up before dawn, feeding chickens that cluck nervously as if they sense the unease. Your hands are rough from scrubbing pots, and your back aches from hauling firewood. Life here is relentless. Puritan life demands discipline, and slacking off could raise eyebrows. You're learning to keep your face neutral, because showing too much emotion might make someone whisper, "Is that the devil's spark in their eye?" It's exhausting, and you're half joking to yourself that surviving the chores might be harder than dodging a witch hunt. But the tension in Salem is no joke. It's a spark waiting for kindling. Every day, you notice the village fraying a bit more. You pass the meeting house, where folks gather not just for sermons, but to trade gossip. The talk's all about Betty Paris and Abigail Williams, the girls whose fits started this mess. You've heard their thrashing, speaking in tongues, and claiming invisible forces pinch them. You're at the well, filling your bucket, when you overhear two women muttering about afflictions. One swears she saw Abigail crawl under a table like a possum. Quirky, sure, but it's not funny to them. They're scared, and fear's contagious. You wonder what's really going on. Are the girls sick, faking it? Historians still argue whether it was trauma, boredom, or something else, like ergot poisoning from bad grain. You're no doctor, but you know this much: their outbursts are tearing the village apart. The historical backbone here is clear. Salem Village was a powder keg before the trials even started. The community was split by old grudges, rivalries over land, church seats, even who got to marry whom. You see it in the way people glare across the meeting house. The Paris family, led by the prickly Reverend Samuel Paris, isn't exactly winning hearts. His sermons lean hard into Satan's threat, and you're starting to think he enjoys the drama. You're at a neighbor's house, helping churn butter, when you hear a fringe tidbit. Some folks believe Paris's Caribbean stories about voodoo spooked the girls into their fits. True or not, it's the kind of rumor that sticks. You try to focus on your tasks, mending a torn shirt, baking bread in a smoky hearth, but the village's pulse is quickening. You're chopping wood when you hear about the first formal complaints. Magistrates are involved now, and names are being whispered. Tituba, Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne. You don't know them well, but you've seen Sarah Good begging door to door, her pipe smoke trailing like a curse. She's an easy target, poor, prickly, unpopular. You realize the accusations aren't random. They're aimed at people who don't fit. You're starting to see the pattern, and it makes your stomach churn. What if someone misreads your late-night candle, or you're muttering about a sore knee? As you walk home, the sky gray and heavy, you pass a group of men debating loudly. One says the girl's visions prove the devil's here. Another scoffs, saying kids just want attention. You keep walking, but their words linger. You're not accused yet, but you feel the weight of eyes on you. You joke to yourself that maybe you should stop petting stray cats, lest someone calls it a familiar. But the truth is, you're scared. The village you thought you knew is turning on itself, and surviving means staying invisible. You pull your cloak tighter, head down, and wonder how long you can keep this up. You're still trudging through Salem Village, 1692, where the air feels heavier, like a storm's brewing. The accusations you've been hearing about, Tituba, Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, aren't just gossip anymore. They're ripping the village apart. You're out fetching water, your bucket sloshing, when you notice folks clumped together, whispering furiously. The girls, Betty and Abigail, are pointing fingers, and now others, like Ann Putnam Jr., are joining in, claiming they're tormented by witches. You see fear in people's eyes, but also something uglier, glee maybe, at seeing rivals squirm. It's like the village is a pot boiling over, and you're stuck stirring it. You joke to yourself that you'd rather face a cranky cow than this mob, but the chaos is real, and you're right in it. The accusations are spiraling. You're at the meeting house, squeezed onto a bench when you hear the latest. Sarah Good's own daughter, a 5-year-old, is accused of biting someone in a vision. 5 years old. You're stunned, but the crowd eats it up. Historically, this was a turning point. Once children were accused, no one was safe. The court records show over 150 people eventually faced charges, from toddlers to the elderly. A quirky tidbit? Some accusers claimed witches sent their specters to pinch them from miles away, a ghostly Zoom call of malice. You can't help but roll your eyes, but no one's laughing. Historians still argue whether the accusers believed their own stories or were caught in a game they couldn't stop. You try to stick to your routine, milking goats, sweeping the hearth, but it's hard to focus when trust is crumbling. You pass a neighbor, Goody Proctor, who used to share her apple butter recipe. Now she won't meet your eyes. You hear she's been whispering about Sarah Osborne's late-night walks. You're starting to see how fast friends turn foes. Yesterday you shared a cider with someone. Today they're glaring, maybe wondering if your limp is a witch's curse. You're tempted to joke that your only magic is burning bread, but humor's risky now. One wrong word and you're on the list. The village feels like a stage, and everyone's playing a part. You're at the tavern, well, more like a dim room with sour ale, when you overhear men debating the accusations. One says the devils picked Salem to test the godly. Another mutters it's just greedy folks settling scores. You're not sure who's right, but you notice the accusers are often from powerful families, like the Putnams, while the accused are outsiders or rivals. You remember that stray cat you saw near Goody Proctor's door? Call back to those early whispers. Now you wonder if someone's using it against her. The thought makes your skin crawl. As you head home, the wind biting your face, you realize survival means more than avoiding the gallows. It's about dodging the invisible traps of rumor and spite. You're careful now, avoiding late-night errands or chatting too long with anyone. You pass the Paris house where candles flicker and wonder what's happening inside. Are the girls still writhing? Are they scared too? You don't know, but you feel the village's heartbeat, fast, erratic, dangerous. You pull your scarf tight, keep your head down, and pray no one's watching you too closely. Staying alive means staying forgettable, but even that feels like a gamble. You're still in Salem Village, 1692, where the accusations have lit a fire that's spreading fast. The meeting house looms ahead, its steeple cutting into a gray sky, as you hurry toward the first official witchcraft trial. Your boots crunch on frost, and your breath clouds in the chilly air. The village is buzzing. Folks are piling into the courtroom, some curious, some out for blood. You're just trying to blend in, but it's like walking a tightrope. One wrong glance, and someone might whisper your name next. You joke to yourself that you'd rather be wrestling a pig than facing this crowd, but the stakes are deadly, and you're caught in the middle. You squeeze into the packed courtroom, the air thick with sweat and murmurs. The magistrates, stern men in black coats, sit at a high table, their faces like stone. You've seen trials before, but this feels different, like a play where everyone's forgotten their lines. Historically, the Court of Oyer and Terminer was formed in May 1692 to handle the witchcraft cases, a formal escalation from local hearings. A quirky tidbit? The court allowed touch tests, where an accused witch's touch was supposed to calm a victim's fits, about as scientific as flipping a coin. Historians still argue whether the magistrates genuinely believed in witchcraft or were just desperate to restore order. You watch as Sarah Good is questioned. She's gaunt, her hair tangled, and her sharp tongue doesn't help. The girls, Abigail, Anne, and others, shriek, claiming Sarah's specter is tormenting them. You're skeptical. It looks like a performance, but the crowd's eating it up. You notice how the magistrates lean forward, hanging on the girl's every word. You're tempted to mutter that this is crazier than a fox in a henhouse, but you bite your tongue. Speaking out could land you in chains. Instead, you shift on the hard bench, trying to look pious and unremarkable. The room feels like it's shrinking as the accusations fly. You hear whispers about Sarah Osborne's scandalous past, rumors she lived with a man before marriage. It's gossip, but it's enough to damn her here. You realize the trials aren't just about witchcraft. They're a chance to settle old scores. You think back to that tense moment at the well, call back to the gossip you overheard, when women muttered about afflictions. Now those whispers are weapons, and the court's giving them weight. You wonder who's next, maybe someone who crossed a Putnam or owed a debt. The thought makes your palms sweat. As you leave the courtroom, the crowd's still buzzing, some shouting for justice, others praying. You pass a child tugging her mother's skirt, asking if witches really fly. You almost smile, but the weight of the day stops you. The trials are just starting, and you're already exhausted from keeping your head down. You head home, the path darker now, and vow to avoid the meeting house tomorrow. But deep down, you know you can't escape this. The court's in session, and Salem's tearing itself apart. You just hope you can stay out of the spotlight. You're still navigating Salem Village, 1692, where the witchcraft trials are gaining steam, and the village feels like it's holding its breath. You're hauling a basket of turnips from the garden, your fingers numb from the cold, when you hear the latest courtroom gossip. The trials are leaning on something called spectral evidence, and it's got everyone rattled. You're headed to the meeting house again, not because you want to, but because skipping it might look suspicious. The crowd's thicker now, and you feel eyes on you as you slip inside. You're joking to yourself that you'd rather be stuck milking a grumpy goat than sitting through this, but the courtroom's no laughing matter, it's a trap waiting to snap. Inside, the air's stale, and the magistrates are grilling another accused woman, Goody Corey. The girls, Abigail, Anne, and their growing posse, are at it again, writhing and pointing, claiming Martha Corey's specter is choking them. Spectral evidence, you learn, is testimony about visions or dreams where the accused spirit supposedly attacks someone. It's wild. How do you defend against a ghost? Historically, this was a cornerstone of the Salem trials, allowed because Puritans believed the devil could use a person's specter to do harm. A quirky tidbit? Some claimed specters appeared as animals, like a yellow bird perched on a witch's shoulder. You're tempted to scoff, sounds like a bad bedtime story, but the court's eating it up. Historians still argue whether the judges accepted this evidence out of faith or fear of losing control. You shift on the bench, your back aching, and watch Martha Corey try to defend herself. She's sharp, denying the charges, but every time she speaks, the girls scream louder. You notice the crowd split. Some nod with the girls, others look uneasy. You're starting to see how this works. The louder the accusers, the harder it is to fight back. You think back to Sarah Good's trial, call back to that chaotic courtroom scene, where her sharp tongue didn't save her. Martha's not begging either, and you admire her grit, but you're scared for her. You're scared for yourself, too. Could a bad dream land you here? The magistrates ask the girls to describe Martha's specter, and Ann Putnam swears it pinched her last night. You're no lawyer, but this feels flimsier than a cobweb. You're tempted to joke that if dreams are evidence, you're guilty of eating too much pie in your sleep. But you stay silent, your hands clenched. The room feels like it's tilting, and you realize this spectral nonsense could target anyone. You've got no enemies, at least you hope not, but what if someone misreads your late-night candle or that time you muttered about a headache? As you leave the meeting house, the sky's a bruised purple, and the crowd's still murmuring. You pass a man muttering that spectral evidence is the devil's own trick. You agree, but keep walking. The trials are a machine now, grinding up logic and spitting out fear. You head home, your turnips forgotten, and vow to avoid the girl's gaze. But the village is small, and eyes are everywhere. You're just trying to survive, but with specters haunting the courtroom, staying invisible feels harder than ever. You're still weaving through Salem Village, 1692, where Tituba's confession has turned the witch hunt into a wildfire. You're mending a torn sleeve by candlelight, the flame flickering like it's nervous too, when you hear murmurs outside, neighbors turning on neighbors, suspicion poisoning every glance. You're trying to keep your routine, churning butter, feeding the hens, but it's like walking on eggshells. The village feels fractured, and you're caught in the cracks. You joke to yourself that you'd rather haggle with a stubborn goat than navigate this mess, but the betrayal all around you is no laughing matter, and staying unnoticed is your only shield. You're at the market, bartering for salt, when you see it firsthand. Goody Proctor, who once shared her cider recipe, whispering to a magistrate about Goody Nurse. Rebecca Nurse, of all people, pious, elderly, a pillar of the church, is now a suspected witch. You're floored. The accusation comes from Ann Putnam Jr., claiming Rebecca's specter haunts her. Historically, this escalation marked a shift. By spring 1692, accusations spread beyond outcasts like Tituba to respected community members. A quirky tidbit? Some believed witches sent toads as spies. Imagine blaming a frog for your troubles. Historians still argue whether these betrayals stemmed from personal grudges or mass hysteria gripping the village. You feel the sting of it. Friends you trusted now wield words like knives. You remember chatting with Goody Nurse at the well, callback to those early gossip sessions. Her kind smile as she offered you a carrot. Now she's in chains, and you're wondering who's next. You notice the Putnams are behind many accusations, their wealth and influence steering the court. It's not just about witches, it's about power. You're tempted to mutter that this is crazier than a cat chasing its tail, but you keep quiet. One stray word, and you're the next name on the list. You try to stay neutral, nodding politely as neighbors rant about the devil's work. But it's hard when you see families split, siblings accusing siblings, husbands doubting wives. You're at the tavern, sipping watery ale, when you overhear two men arguing. One swears the accusations are God's justice. The other mutters it's all lies to grab land. You're starting to think the second guy's onto something. The village is a chessboard, and you're a pawn trying not to get knocked off. You wonder if your small plot of land or your spot in church could make you a target. As you head home, the sky heavy with clouds, you pass the meeting house, its windows dark. The air feels thick, like it's carrying every whispered betrayal. You're exhausted from watching your every step, every word. You think of Goody Proctor's sharp whisper, and it chills you. Could anyone turn on you? Survival means fading into the background, but with neighbors becoming enemies, even that feels like a gamble. You pull your cloak tight, eyes down, and pray no one's plotting your name in the dark. You're still in Salem Village, 1692, where betrayal has turned neighbors into strangers, and the witch hunt's grip is tightening. You're hauling water from the well, your arms aching, when you hear the clank of chains nearby, another accused being dragged to jail. The village feels like a snare, and you're tiptoeing to avoid its jaws. You're told to visit the jail to deliver bread for a prisoner, maybe out of Christian duty, maybe to prove you're not hiding anything. You'd rather be untangling a sheep's fleece than stepping into that grim place, you joke to yourself. But the reality of the jail is no jest. It's a stark reminder of what awaits the accused, and you're praying you never see it from the inside. You approach the jail, a squat, timber building with barred windows, the air sour with damp and despair. Inside, it's worse, dark, cold, and reeking of unwashed bodies and mildew. You see familiar faces, Goody Nurse, Sarah Good, even a frail child, huddled on straw, their wrists chafed by irons. Historically, Salem's jail was overcrowded by mid-1692, holding dozens in filthy conditions that bred disease. A quirky tidbit? Prisoners had to pay for their own food and chains, as if being accused wasn't punishment enough. Historians still argue whether the jail's horrors were meant to break the accused or just a byproduct of the town's panic. You hand over the bread, trying not to gag at the stench, and catch Goody Nurse's eye. She's pale but calm, praying softly. You remember her kindness, call back to that carrot she shared, and your throat tightens. She whispers thanks, but you're too scared to linger. Guards are watching, and you don't want to seem too friendly. The prisoners are a mix. Some deny the charges. Others, like Tituba,
confessed to avoid worse. You wonder what you'd do in their place. The jail's a living nightmare. Rats scurry, and the straw's more mud than bedding. You're tempted to mutter that this place is worse than a pigsty, but you hold your tongue. As you leave, a guard grumbles about the witches eating up town resources. You nod, keeping your face blank, but inside you're reeling. These aren't witches, just people, some you've known for years, now broken by suspicion. You think of the courtroom's spectral evidence, call back to those ghostly accusations, how it landed so many here. The jail's a warning, one wrong step and you're next. You're starting to notice who's accused, outcasts, the poor, the outspoken. It's not random, and that scares you more than the devil's book ever could. You head home, the jail's stink clinging to your clothes, the sky a dull gray. The village feels quieter now, but it's not peace, it's fear. You're exhausted from dodging suspicion, from pretending everything's fine. You pass the meeting house, its steeple like a judge's gavel, and vow to keep your head lower than ever. Survival means staying forgettable, but with the jail's shadow looming, you're not sure that's enough. You grip your cloak, eyes on the ground, and pray no one's whispering your name. You're still trudging through Salem Village, 1692, where the witch hunt has turned the air thick with dread. You're stacking firewood outside your home, the cold biting your fingers, when you hear the grim news. Executions have started at Gallows Hill. The village is hushed, but it's not grief. It's a mix of fear and grim fascination. You're told to attend, maybe to show you're on the right side, and you go, your stomach churning. You'd rather be wrestling a stubborn mule than facing this, you joke to yourself. But the gallows are real, and their shadow falls over everyone, including you. You join the crowd at Gallows Hill, a rocky outcrop just outside town. The sky's heavy, clouds like bruises, and the air smells of damp earth. You see the noose swaying, a stark silhouette against the horizon. Today, it's Bridget Bishop, a tavern keeper with a sharp tongue, convicted on spectral evidence and old gossip about her flashy clothes. Historically, Bridget was the first executed in June 1692, marking a deadly escalation. 19 would eventually hang. A quirky tidbit? Some claimed Bridget's specter haunted them in a red bodice, as if fashion was a crime. Historians still argue whether her execution was meant to quell the panic or just fed the frenzy. You stand at the crowd's edge, trying to look solemn but not too involved. The girls, Abigail, Anne, and others, are here, their eyes wide, though you notice some look pale, maybe shaken. Bridget stands tall, denying the charges to the end. The crowd's mixed, some shout for justice, others mutter prayers. You're tempted to whisper that this feels more like a lynching than a trial, but you clamp your mouth shut. You think back to the jail's misery, call back to that reeking cell, where Bridget spent her final days. Now she's here, and you're wondering who's next.
The execution is quick but heavy. You don't look away. You can't afford to seem weak, but your hands tremble. The crowd disperses slowly, some whispering about the devil's defeat, others silent. You notice a neighbor, Goody Proctor, staring at the gallows, her face unreadable. Is she scared or plotting? You don't know anymore. The trials have twisted everyone, and you're starting to doubt even the people you once trusted. You realize the gallows aren't just for the condemned. They're a warning to you, to everyone, to stay in line. As you walk home, the wind carries a chill that feels personal. The village is quieter now, but it's the silence of a held breath. You're exhausted from keeping your head down, from pretending you're not terrified. You pass the meeting house, its windows dark, and think of the spectral evidence that sent Bridget to her death, call back to those courtroom visions. Survival means staying invisible, but with Gallows Hill looming, you're not sure that's enough. You pull your cloak tighter, eyes on the path, and pray your name stays far from the magistrate's lips. You're still in Salem Village, 1692, where the gallows shadow stretches over every doorstep. You're milking a cow at dawn, the air sharp with frost, when you hear hushed talk of ministers questioning the trials. The executions, like Bridget Bishop's, have shaken some, and you're catching whispers of doubt in the village's pulse. You're headed to the meeting house, not for a trial, but a sermon, though you know it'll be more about witches than salvation. You'd rather be untangling a knotted rope than sitting through this, you joke to yourself, but the minister's words carry weight, and you need to know if the tide's turning, or if you're still one misstep from trouble. Inside the meeting house, the pews creak under a tense crowd. Reverend Increase Mather, a big name from Boston, is visiting, and his sermon's a mix of fire and caution. He warns of the devil's tricks, but hints the court's gone too far with spectral evidence. You perk up, maybe reasons creeping in. Historically, Mather's October 1692 writings urged caution, arguing the devil could fake specters to frame the innocent. A quirky tidbit? Some ministers believed witches held Sabbaths with feasts of stolen babies. Pure folklore, but it spooked the pious. Historians still argue whether Mather's doubts slowed the trials or just covered his own reputation. You glance around, seeing familiar faces, Goody Proctor, the tavern keeper, listening hard. The Reverend's words feel like a crack in the witch hunt's armor, but you're not naive. The girls, Abigail and Anne, are in the front pew, silent for once, and you wonder if they're rattled by the shift. You think back to the gallows' grim scene, call back to Bridget's execution, where doubt didn't save her. Mather's preaching justice, but the magistrates aren't here, and the crowd's still jumpy. You're tempted to mutter that this sermon's as useless as a leaky bucket, but you stay quiet. Doubting out loud could paint a target on you. You notice some folks nodding at Mather's words, but others clutch their Bibles tighter, like they're scared to let go of the witch hunt. You get it. Fear's easier than admitting the village got it wrong. You're starting to see the ministers aren't all on the same page. Some, like Paris, still fan the flames, while others, like Mather, are pulling back. It's a tug of war, and you're stuck in the middle, trying not to slip. You wonder if you could appeal to a minister if accused, but the thought fades. You're no one special, and the court loves its victims humble. As you leave, the sky's a pale gray, and the village feels like it's holding its breath. You pass the jail, its barred windows a grim reminder. Call back to that stinking cell. The minister's debate might slow things, but the trials are still rolling, and you're not safe yet. You're exhausted from dodging suspicion, from measuring every word. Survival means blending in, but with the church wobbling between fear and reason, you're not sure where to stand. You tug your scarf tight, eyes down, and pray the minister's doubts spread faster than the accusations.
You're still in Salem Village, 1692, where broken families and relentless accusations have left the air heavy with mistrust. You're mending a fence in the dim morning light, your hands scratched from splintered wood, when word spreads, Governor Phipps is stepping in to halt the trials. The news ripples through the village like a hesitant breeze, and you're cautiously hopeful, but wary too. You're headed to the tavern to hear more, your boots slogging through mud. You'd rather be coaxing a shy calf than wading into gossip, you joke to yourself, but the governor's move could change everything, and you need to know if the witch hunt's grip is finally loosening. At the tavern, the air's thick with smoke and murmurs. Men huddle over mugs, debating Phipps's order. You learn he's dissolved the Court of Oyer and Terminer, ending the trials that sent so many to Gallows Hill. Historically, Phipps acted in October 1692, pressured by growing doubts from ministers like Increase Mather and mounting outrage from Boston's elite. A quirky tidbit, Phipps's wife was briefly accused of witchcraft. Talk about a wake-up call for the governor. Historians still argue whether he stopped the trials out of justice or to save his own political skin. You offer a quiet word of comfort, but Goody Wilson barely nods.
You think back to the gallows, call back to Bridget Bishop's execution, where the crowd's cheers drowned out mercy. Now families are tearing themselves apart, and you're wondering who you can trust. Your own kin are safe, for now, but you've seen cousins turn on cousins over less. You're tempted to mutter that this village is crazier than a fox in a trap, but you hold back. One wrong word, and you're the next name whispered in court. As you leave, you pass a child kicking stones, muttering about her mother's witch mark. It's chilling. Kids are caught in this too, either accusing or accused. You notice the village's rhythm is off. Homes that once shared bread now lock their doors. You're at the market bartering for flour when you overhear a man disowning his sister for spectral crimes. The betrayal cuts deep, and you realize the trials aren't just about witches, they're about power, fear, and settling scores. You wonder if Goody Wilson's brother wants her land or just her shame. Either way, she's broken, and you're scared you could be next. You head home, the dusk cold and heavy, the village quieter but not calmer. You pass the meeting house, its steeple looming like a judge, call back to Mather's sermon. The minister's doubts haven't stopped the accusations, and families are crumbling under the weight. You're exhausted from watching every step, from pretending you're not shaken. Survival means keeping your circle small, but with kin turning on kin, even that feels risky. You grip your shawl, eyes on the path, and pray your name stays out of the courtroom's reach. You're still in Salem Village, 1692, where broken families and relentless accusations have left the air heavy with mistrust. You're mending a fence in the dim morning light, your hands scratched from splintered wood, when word spreads, Governor Phipps is stepping in to halt the trials. The news ripples through the village like a hesitant breeze, and you're cautiously hopeful, but wary too. You're headed to the tavern to hear more, your boots slogging through mud. You'd rather be coaxing a shy calf than wading into gossip, you joke to yourself, but the governor's move could change everything, and you need to know. At the tavern, the air's thick with smoke and murmurs. Men huddle over mugs, debating Phipps's order. You learn he's dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer, ending the trials that sent so many to Gallows Hill. Historically, Phipps acted in October 1692, pressured by growing doubts from ministers like Increase Mather and mounting outrage from Boston's elite. A quirky tidbit, Phipps's wife was briefly accused of witchcraft. Talk about a wake-up call for the governor. Historians still argue whether he stopped the trials out of justice or to save his own political skin.
You sip watery ale, listening as a farmer claims Phipps fears God's wrath for the executions. Another scoffs, saying it's just politics. Too many respected folks, like Rebecca Nurse, got caught in the net. You think back to the gallows' grim scene, call back to Bridget Bishop's execution, where the crowd's fervor felt unstoppable. Now, with the court dismantled, you wonder if the village can exhale. But you're not naive. The girls, Abigail and Anne, are still around, and their accusations haven't stopped. You're tempted to mutter that shutting the court is like locking the barn after the cows are gone, but you stay quiet. Doubt's still dangerous. You notice the tavern's mood is mixed. Some cheer the news, others grumble, clinging to the witch hunt's purpose. You're starting to see the village's wounds. Families split, like Goody Wilson's. Callback to her brother's betrayal won't heal overnight. Phipps's order frees some prisoners, but not all, and the jail's still packed. You wonder what happens next. Will the accusers face consequences? Will the village admit its mistakes? You're no magistrate, but you feel the weight of justice shifting, and it's shaky ground. You've kept your head down, but the fear lingers. Could old grudges resurface? As you leave, the sky's a dull silver, and the village feels caught between relief and regret. You pass the meeting house, its steeple less menacing now, call back to Mather's sermon. The trials are paused, but the scars remain, and you're not sure what peace looks like. You're exhausted from dodging suspicion, from carrying the village's tension. Survival means staying cautious, even with the governor's intervention. You pull your cloak tight, eyes on the path, and pray the whispers of witchcraft fade before they find you. You're still in Salem Village, 1692, where Governor Phipps's order to halt the trials has left the village in a strange limbo. You're hauling hay to the barn, your arms itching from the dry stalks, when you sense the shift. Folks are quieter, but the wounds of the witch hunt are raw. The gallows are empty for now, and the courtroom's silent, but the village feels like a bruised fruit, tender and unsteady. You're headed to the meeting house to hear a sermon, hoping for clarity, but you're braced for more unease. You'd rather be soothing a skittish horse than facing this crowd, you joke to yourself, but the aftermath of the trials is settling in, and you're wondering what it means for you and Salem. The meeting house is half full, the air heavy with unspoken guilt. The minister speaks of forgiveness, but his words feel hollow against the memory of executions. You look around. Goody Proctor's there, her face tight. The Putnams sit stiffly, avoiding eyes. The trial's end hasn't erased the damage. Families are split, fields lie fallow, and trust is a ghost. Historically, by early 1693, most prisoners were released, and the village began grappling with its shame. Over 20 dead, countless lives ruined. A quirky tidbit? Some locals blamed a comet seen in 1692 for sparking the hysteria, as if stars could curse a town. Historians still argue whether Salem's reckoning was genuine remorse or just a scramble to save face. You shift on the pew, your back sore, and think back to the jail's misery. Call back to that reeking cell. Those who survived, like Goody Nurse, are free now, but they're not whole. You hear whispers of apologies. Some accusers, even Ann Putnam Jr., later recanted, but it's too late for the dead. You're tempted to mutter that apologies are as useful as a broken plow, but you stay silent. The village is tiptoeing around its sins, and you're still cautious. You've dodged accusations so far, but the scars of suspicion linger. Could a neighbor still point a finger to deflect their own guilt? You notice the sermon's tone, less fire, more ashes. The minister urges unity, but you see the cracks. Families like Goody Wilson's, call back to her brother's betrayal, won't mend easily. You're starting to feel the weight of survival, not just avoiding the gallows, but living among people who cheered for them. You wonder what you'd do if you faced an accuser now. Forgive? Flee? You're no saint, and the village's wounds mirror your own doubts. The trials are over, but their echo haunts every doorstep, every glance.
As you leave, the dusk is soft, the village quieter but not healed. You pass the gallows' empty hill, call back to Bridget's execution, its silence louder than any crowd. You're exhausted from carrying the fear, from rebuilding a life in this fractured place. Survival now means navigating guilt and ghosts, both yours and Salem's. You tug your shawl close, eyes on the path, and pray the village can find peace before old wounds fester anew. You're still in Salem Village, 1693, where the trials have stopped, but their shadow lingers like damp in the walls. You're tending a small garden, pulling weeds under a pale spring sky, when you overhear neighbors debating why the witch hunt happened at all. The village is trying to move on. Fields need planting, homes need mending. But the past clings tight. You're headed to the tavern to trade a few eggs, hoping to catch more talk about what drove Salem mad. You'd rather be coaxing a stubborn seedling than digging into this, you joke to yourself. But understanding the hysteria might help you feel safer, or at least make sense of the scars you're all carrying. At the tavern, the air's warm with chatter and the tang of ale. A farmer blames the devil. A weaver points to land disputes. You listen, piecing together theories like a quilt. Historically, scholars note multiple triggers for the 1692 panic. Religious fervor, economic stress, and smallpox fears created a perfect storm.
A quirky tidbit? Some theorize ergot, a hallucinogenic mold in rye bread, sparked the girl's fits. Imagine a whole village tripping on bad grain. Historians still argue whether the hysteria was a collective breakdown or a calculated power grab by families like the Putnams. You sip your drink, thinking back to the courtroom's chaos. Call back to spectral evidence. Was it fear of Satan or fear of losing control that drove the accusations? You're leaning toward the latter. Too many grudges, like those against Goody Nurse, call back to her arrest, felt personal. You notice the tavern's mood is restless. Folks want answers, not just scapegoats. Someone mentions the girls, Abigail and Anne, saying they've gone quiet, maybe ashamed. You're tempted to mutter that their silence is louder than their screams ever were, but you hold back. Blaming them feels too easy, and you're starting to see everyone played a part, even you, by staying silent. You wonder about your own role. Did you nod too quickly when accusations flew? Could you have spoken up? The questions sting, but they're part of surviving now, facing the truth without breaking. You hear a man argue the trials were about control, keeping women and outsiders in line. It tracks. Most accused were like Tituba or Sarah Good on society's edges. You're no scholar, but you feel the village's fear wasn't just of witches, it was of anything different. The realization settles heavy, like damp soil in your hands. As you head home, the dusk softens the village's edges, but its wounds are still raw. You pass the meeting house, its steeple less looming now, call back to Mather's sermon. The theories swirl, but they don't erase the pain or the dead. You're exhausted from carrying the past, from rebuilding in a place that betrayed itself. Survival means sifting through the why, even if the answers hurt. You tug your shawl close, eyes on the path, and pray the village's ghosts don't stir again. You're still in Salem Village, 1693, where the witch hunt's echoes linger as the village tries to heal its wounds. You're chopping wood in the early morning chill, your breath clouding, when you start thinking about how to survive in a place so quick to turn on its own. The trials are over, but suspicion still simmers, and you're hyper-aware of every word, every glance. You're headed to the market to trade some firewood, hoping to keep your head down while picking up scraps of news. You'd rather be untangling a knotted fishing line than dodging invisible traps, you joke to yourself. But surviving in Salem means outsmarting the whispers, and you're determined to stay one step ahead.
At the market, stalls are sparse, but the air hums with cautious chatter. You overhear a woman advising another to avoid late-night walks, too easy to be called a witch's errand. You realize survival here is about strategy. Blend in, but not too much. Be pious, but not showy. Historically, those who escaped accusation often kept neutral, like Samuel Sewell, a judge who later apologized for his role. A quirky tidbit? Some believed carrying a Bible warded off witches, as if Scripture was a magic shield. Historians still argue whether survival hinged on social savvy or sheer luck in dodging the girl's accusations. You barter your wood, keeping your voice low, and think back to the courtroom's chaos, call back to Tituba's confession. You avoided trouble by staying quiet, but now you're strategizing harder. Never linger near the Paris house, never argue with a Putnam. You notice Goody Proctor at a stall, her smile tight, and remember her whispers against Goody Nurse, call back to that betrayal. She's free, but her reputation's scarred. You're tempted to mutter that surviving Salem's like dodging rain in a storm, pure chance, but you stay silent. One wrong move, even now, could revive old grudges. You start mapping your own survival plan. Attend church, not at sermons, avoid the girls like Abigail, who've gone quiet but still unnerve you. You're no saint, but you fake it, muttering prayers loudly, helping neighbors with small chores to seem harmless. You wonder if you could have done more during the trials, spoken for someone like Bridget Bishop, call back to her execution. The guilt nags, but you push it down. Survival means focusing on now, not then. You notice the market's quieter than it used to be. Fears faded, but trust hasn't returned. Everyone's playing the same game. Look innocent, stay forgettable.
As you head home, the sky's a soft gray, and the village feels like it's holding its breath. You pass the meeting house, its steeple a reminder of sermons and trials, callback to Mather's words. You're exhausted from the constant vigilance, from pretending you're not haunted by the past. Survival now means mastering the art of invisibility, but with Salem's scars still fresh, you're not sure that's enough. You grip your cloak, eyes on the path, and pray your careful steps keep you out of the village's lingering shadows. You're still in Salem Village, 1693, where the witch hunt scars are fresh, and you're learning to navigate a world where trust is as thin as spring ice. You're feeding chickens in the early dawn, their clucks a small comfort, when you start thinking about fear itself, the spark that turned Salem into a crucible. The trials are over, but the village's paranoia lingers, and you're wondering how fear twisted neighbors into accusers. You're headed to a neighbor's to return a borrowed axe, hoping to glean more about what drove the madness. You'd rather be soothing a spooked cult, you joke to yourself, but understanding fear might help you avoid its grip, and you're determined to keep your footing. At Goody Clark's house, the air's warm with baking bread, but her voice is low, recounting how fear of the devil, or maybe just of being accused, made folks point fingers. She mentions the girls' fifths, how their screams set the village ablaze. You nod, piecing it together. Fear wasn't just belief in witches, it was dread of being next. Historically, Puritan theology fed this panic, preaching that Satan was always near, testing the godly. A quirky tidbit? Some believed witches could curse you with a glance, so people avoided eye contact. Imagine a whole village squinting suspiciously. Historians still argue whether fear was a genuine spiritual crisis or a mask for deeper tensions like land disputes. You think back to the courtroom's chaos, call back to spectral evidence, where fear turned visions into verdicts. You're starting to see it wasn't just about the devil, it was about control, about crushing anything that felt other. You notice Goody Clark's hands tremble as she talks. She's still scared, even now. You're tempted to mutter that fear's stickier than molasses, but you stay quiet. You felt it too, every time you avoided the Paris house or lowered your gaze at church. Call back to your survival strategies. Fear made you small, and you're not proud of it, but you're still here. You start mapping your own survival plan. Attend church, nod at sermons, avoid the girls like Abigail, who've gone quiet but still unnerve you. You're no saint, but you fake it, muttering prayers loudly, helping neighbors with small chores to seem harmless. You wonder if you could have done more during the trials, spoken for someone like Bridget Bishop, call back to her execution. The guilt nags, but you push it down. Survival means focusing on now, not then. You notice
You wonder how you'd handle fear now. Could you face a false accusation without crumbling? You're no hero, but you're learning. Keep your voice steady, your routines dull. You notice the village is quieter, but it's not peace, it's exhaustion. At the market later, you hear a man blame fear for his sister's accusation, call back to Goody Wilson's betrayal. It tracks. Fear made people betray kin, not courage. You're starting to think fear's the real witch, bewitching Salem into madness. The realization settles heavy, like frost on your shoulders. As you head home, the morning's soft, but the village feels brittle. You pass the meeting house, its steeple less looming, but still heavy with memories. Call back to Mather's sermon. You're tired of carrying fear, of scanning every face for a threat. Survival now means facing that fear, not just dodging it. But with Salem's wounds still open, that feels like a tall order. You tug your cloak close, eyes on the path, and pray you can outlast the village's lingering dread. You're still in Salem Village, 1693, where the witch hunt's wounds are raw and fear's shadow lingers like fog. You're mending a leaky bucket, your hands slick with cold water, when you notice a pattern. Women, especially those like Bridget Bishop or Sarah Good, bore the brunt of the accusations. The village is limping toward normalcy, but you're wondering why women were so often the target.
You're headed to the meeting house for a women's prayer group, hoping to understand this lopsided blame. You'd rather be untangling a snarled loom than probing this sore spot, you joke to yourself, but the question of women's scrutiny gnaws at you, and you need answers to feel steady in this fractured place. At the meeting house, the women's voices are soft, their prayers laced with unease. Goody Clark, who you spoke with before, whispers about the trials, saying women were accused for being too outspoken or too different. You nod, seeing it. Sarah Good's sharp tongue, Bridget's bold red bodice. Things men might shrug off were crimes for women. Historically, about 80% of Salem's accused were women, often widows, spinsters, or those defying Puritan norms. A quirky tidbit? Some believed women were more susceptible to the devil because Eve fell first in Eden. Talk about a grudge lasting centuries. Historians still argue whether this was misogyny, religious dogma, or a mix of both fueling the trials. You think back to the gallows, call back to Bridget's execution, where women's defiance didn't save them. You're starting to see how the village's rules, be meek, be modest, were traps for women. You notice Goody Clark's hesitation. She's still cautious, maybe afraid of seeming too bold. You're tempted to mutter that surviving as a woman here is like threading a needle in a storm, but you stay quiet. You've kept your own voice low, your steps small, call back to your survival strategies, but it stings to realize how much you've dimmed yourself to stay safe. You wonder what you'd do if accused. Could you stay calm, or would you snap like Sarah Good? You're no rebel, but you feel the weight of eyes on you, always watching for a slip. At the prayer group, you hear a woman pray for her sister, accused and freed, but shunned. It hits hard. Women weren't just targeted, they were erased, their reputations shredded. You're starting to think the trials weren't just about witches, they were about keeping women in line. The realization settles like a stone in your chest, heavy and cold. As you leave, the dusk is gentle, but the village feels sharp-edged. You pass the jail, its barred windows a grim reminder, call back to that reeking cell. You're exhausted from navigating this world, from shrinking to fit its rules. Survival now means seeing the traps, gender, gossip, godliness, and sidestepping them, but with women still watched, that's no small feat. You pull your shawl tight, eyes on the path, and pray you can keep your spark hidden from Salem's judging gaze.
You're still in Salem Village, 1693, where the witch hunt scars run deep and the village is grappling with its ghosts. You're stacking firewood under a crisp morning sky, the air sharp with pine, when you hear about children, not just as victims, but as accusers, shaping the trial's chaos. The girls like Abigail and Ann Putnam Jr. were at the heart of it, their voices carrying unnatural weight. You're headed to the market, where mothers are trading hushed stories about their kids' roles. You'd rather be coaxing a shy lamb than untangling this mess, you joke to yourself. But the power of children's words in Salem gnaws at you, and you need to understand how they tipped the scales. At the market, stalls are busy, but the talk is low and tense. A woman recounts how her daughter mimicked the afflicted girl's fits, hoping for attention, only to spark rumors. You listen, piecing it together. Children, especially girls, became the trial's fuel, their accusations taken as divine truth. Historically, young accusers like Ann Putnam Jr., aged 12, drove many convictions. Their fits were seen as proof of witchcraft. A quirky tidbit? Some believed children were too pure to lie about specters, as if innocence guaranteed honesty, never mind their tantrums over chores. Historians still argue whether the children were manipulated, traumatized, or just caught in a game that spun out of control. You think back to the courtroom's frenzy, call back to Tituba's confession, where Abigail's screams set the tone. You're starting to see how children's voices, usually ignored, became weapons, maybe because adults needed their purity to justify the madness. You notice a mother at the market, her eyes weary, watching her daughter skip nearby. She's probably scared her child could accuse someone or be accused, like Sarah Good's young daughter. Call back to that chilling courtroom moment. You're tempted to mutter that kids ruling a courtroom is wilder than a fox leading a hunt, but you stay silent. You've kept your own words spare, your presence dull, to avoid trouble. Call back to your survival strategies. You wonder what drove the children. Were they scared? Bored? Coached by parents like the Putnams? You're no parent, but you feel the weight of their influence. Anne's accusations sent Goody Nurse to her death. Call back to her arrest. You notice the market's quieter when children pass. Folks are wary, maybe remembering how a child's word could doom a neighbor. You're starting to think the trials didn't just break families, they twisted childhood itself, turning play into power. The realization settles like frost, cold and sharp. As you head home, the morning light softens, but the village feels taut. You pass the meeting house, its steeple a reminder of sermons that fanned the flames. Call back to Mather's words. You're exhausted from carrying the past, from dodging its lessons. Survival now means watching the young as closely as the old, knowing their words could still sting. You tug your cloak close, eyes on the path, and pray Salem's children find peace before their voices spark new fires. You're still in Salem Village, 1693, where the witch hunt's wounds are settling into the village's bones. You're sweeping the hearth, ash dusting your hands, when you start thinking about the church's role in the trials, not just as a backdrop, but as a bellows fanning the flames. The meeting house looms large in every memory, its sermons stoking fear of the devil. You're headed there now for a routine service, hoping to gauge if the clergy's tone has softened. You'd rather be untangling a knotted rope than sitting through another fire and brimstone lecture, you joke to yourself. But the church's influence is key to understanding Salem's madness, and you need to know if its grip is loosening. Inside the meeting house, the air's heavy with wax and whispers. Reverend Paris, whose household sparked this mess, preaches about unity, but his voice still carries that old edge of judgment. You notice fewer people nod along. Some, like Goody Clark, look weary. Historically, the church was central to the trials. Puritan ministers like Paris framed witchcraft as a cosmic battle, urging vigilance. A quirky tidbit? Some believed witches disrupted sermons by sending bees to sting the godly. Imagine blaming a bug for bad preaching. Historians still argue whether the church drove the hysteria or was just swept up in it, amplifying fear to keep control.
You shift on the pew, your back stiff, and think back to the courtroom's chaos. Call back to spectral evidence. Paris's sermons about Satan's snares primed the village for panic, making Abigail's fits seem like divine proof. You're starting to see how the church wasn't just a stage, it was a scriptwriter, shaping fear into accusations. You notice Paris avoids mentioning the trials directly, maybe sensing the village's guilt. You're tempted to mutter that his silence is louder than his old rants, but you stay quiet. You've kept your head down, your prayers loud, call back to your survival strategies. But you're questioning the church's role more than ever. You wonder if you could have leaned on a minister for protection, like some did with Increase Mather, call back to his cautious sermon. But Paris? He's no ally. His own niece, Abigail, started this. You notice the congregation's mood, subdued, not fervent. The church's power feels dented, but its shadow lingers. Folks still fear God's wrath, or at least Paris's glare. You're starting to think the trials weren't just about witches. They were about the church tightening its hold, using fear to keep the flock in line. The realization settles like ash, gritty and hard to shake. As you leave, the dusk is soft, but the village feels tense. You pass the jail, its bars a reminder of the church's endorsed punishments. Call back to that reeking cell. You're exhausted from navigating faith and fear, from pretending you're not doubting. Survival now means seeing the church's role clearly without letting it blind you again.
You pull your shawl tight, eyes on the path, and pray Salem's pulpit preaches peace before it stirs new storms. You're still in Salem Village, 1693, where the witch hunt scars are etched into every doorstep, and the village is piecing itself back together. You're hauling water from the well, your bucket heavy, when you overhear talk of land disputes, old feuds that might have fueled the trial's fire. The accusations often hit families with contested fields or prime plots, and you're starting to wonder if greed, not just fear, drove the chaos. You're headed to the tavern to trade some apples and catch more gossip. You'd rather be soothing a fussy hen than digging into this muck, you joke to yourself. But uncovering these feuds might explain why Salem turned on itself, and you need clarity to feel steady. At the tavern, the air's thick with ale and low voices. A farmer mutters about the Putnams, how their accusations targeted neighbors with land they coveted. You listen, connecting dots. The Putnams' wealth grew after the trials, while families like the nurses lost ground. Historically, land disputes were a silent engine of the 1692 hysteria. Court records show property fights between accusers and accused, especially in Salem Village's cramped borders. A quirky tidbit? Some believed witches cursed land to blight crops, so a bad harvest could spark a feud and an accusation. Historians still argue whether these disputes were the trial's root or just a convenient spark in a fearful village. You sip your drink, thinking back to Goody Nurse's arrest, call back to her betrayal. Her family's land was prime, and the Putnams had long grudged them. You're starting to see the trials as a chess game. Witches were pawns, land the prize. You notice a man at the tavern, his face tight, saying his cousin's field was seized after an accusation. You're tempted to mutter that this witch hunt smells more like a land grab than a holy war, but you stay silent. You've kept your own plot small, your profile low, call back to your survival strategies, but you're wondering if a neighbor's eyeing your patch. You ponder your own place in this. Could you have lost your land if accused? You're no landowner, but even a garden could tempt a greedy eye. You notice the tavern's mood, wary, like everyone's counting their acres. The trials are over, but the feuds simmer, and you're starting to think the village's greed was as deadly as its fear. You recall the gallows' grim weight, call back to Bridget's execution, where justice hid darker motives. The realization settles like mud in your boots. Salem's not just healing from fear, but from its own hunger.
As you head home, the dusk is cool, the village hushed but restless. You pass the meeting house, its steeple a reminder of sermons that masked greed with godliness, call back to Paris's preaching. You're exhausted from carrying these truths, from watching for new threats. Survival now means guarding your small stake, knowing land can still spark betrayal. You tug your cloak close, eyes on the path, and pray Salem's feuds don't reignite before its wounds can heal. You're still in Salem Village, 1693, where the witch hunt's wounds fester, and the village tiptoes around its shame. You're patching a hole in your roof, the straw scratching your hands, when you start thinking about the outcasts, people like Tituba, Sarah Good, and others on the fringes who were the first to face the gallows. The trials may be over, but their stories linger, and you're wondering why society's edges bore the brunt of the blame. You're headed to the market to trade some eggs, hoping to catch whispers about these outsiders. You'd rather be coaxing a skittish goat than probing this raw spot, you joke to yourself, but understanding who was targeted might help you navigate Salem's lingering suspicions, and you're determined to stay clear of trouble. At the market, the air's crisp, and stalls hum with cautious barter. A woman mutters about Sarah Good, how her begging and sharp tongue made her an easy mark. You nod, piecing it together. The accused were often poor, different, or defiant, people the village could afford to lose. Historically, the trials disproportionately hit marginalized groups. Court records show many accused were widows, servants, or, like Tituba, non-Puritan outsiders.
A quirky tidbit? Some believed outcasts kept familiars, cats or toads, as devil's pets, turning a stray animal into proof of witchcraft. Historians still argue whether targeting outcasts was deliberate scapegoating or a reflex of a community desperate for control. You think back to Tituba's confession, call back to her courtroom drama, how her status as an enslaved Caribbean woman made her a perfect first target. You're starting to see the trials as a purge, weeding out those who didn't fit. Sarah Good's poverty, Bridget Bishop's bold style, call back to her execution. You notice a beggar at the market, his eyes down, and feel a pang. He could have been accused in a heartbeat. You're tempted to mutter that Salem's real witch was its fear of difference, but you stay silent. You've kept your own quirks hidden, your routines bland, but you're wondering if that's enough in a village still licking its wounds. You ponder your own place. You're not rich or loud, but you're not an outcast either. Yet one slip could push you to the fringes. You notice the market's glances, quick and wary, as if everyone's sizing up who's other. You're starting to think the trials didn't just hunt witches, they hunted anyone who stood apart. And that fear hasn't fully faded. You recall the jail's grim cells, call back to that reeking prison, where outcasts suffered most. The realization settles like a cold stone. Salem's still watching its edges, and you need to stay firmly in the center. As you head home, the dusk is soft, but the village feels brittle. You pass the meeting house, its steeple a reminder of sermons that damned the different. Call back to Paris's preaching. You're exhausted from blending in, from burying your own spark. Survival now means staying unremarkable, but with outcasts still shunned, that feels like a fragile shield. You pull your shawl tight, eyes on the path, and pray Salem's gaze doesn't turn to you next. You're still in Salem Village, 1693, where the witch hunt scars are settling into the village's bones and folks are trying to rebuild amid lingering guilt. You're hauling firewood, your shoulders aching, when you overhear talk of false confessions, how some, like Tituba, admitted to witchcraft to escape death, while others held firm and faced the gallows. The choice haunts you: lie and live, or defy and die. You're headed to the tavern to trade some kindling and catch more whispers about those who confessed. You'd rather be untangling a knotted net than wrestling with this moral knot, you joke to yourself, but understanding the confessions might help you navigate Salem's fragile peace, and you're determined to keep your footing. At the market, the air's crisp, and stalls hum with cautious barter. A woman mutters about Sarah Good, how her begging and sharp tongue made her an easy mark. You nod, piecing it together. The accused were often poor, different, or defiant, people the village could afford to lose. Historically, the trials disproportionately hit marginalized groups. Court records show many accused were widows, servants, or, like Tituba, not.
At the tavern, the air's warm with chatter and the tang of cider. A man recounts how Tituba's confession saved her life, though she's still shunned. Another mentions Goody Proctor, who never confessed and barely escaped the noose. You listen, piecing it together. False confessions were a grim lifeline for some. Historically, about a quarter of the accused confessed, often under pressure or torture, and most survived, unlike the defiant who hanged. A quirky tidbit: some confessed to fantastical crimes, like flying with the devil, as if wilder lies were more believable. Historians still argue whether confessions were coerced by fear or a desperate bid to outsmart the court. You sip your drink, thinking back to Tituba's dramatic courtroom moment. Call back to her confession, how her words fueled the hysteria but spared her. You're starting to see the confession dilemma as a trap. Lie, and you're marked forever. Deny, and you risk everything. You notice a woman at the tavern, her eyes hollow, rumored to have confessed and recanted. She's free, but avoided, a living ghost. You're tempted to mutter that choosing between truth and survival is like picking between a noose and a cage, but you stay silent. You've kept your own slate clean, your actions dull. call back to your survival strategies, but you're wondering what you'd do under that pressure. You ponder your own limits. Could you lie to save yourself, knowing it damn others? You're no martyr, but the thought of confessing to nothing gnaws at you. You notice the tavern's mood, wary, like everyone's judging who bent and who broke. You're starting to think the trials didn't just test faith, they tested courage, and the village is still grappling with who passed. You recall the gallows' grim weight, call back to Bridget's execution, where truth didn't always save. The realization settles like ash. Confessions, true or false, were just another way Salem tore itself apart. As you head home, the dusk is cool, the village hushed but heavy. You pass the meeting house, its steeple a reminder of sermons that demanded purity, call back to Paris's preaching. You're exhausted from carrying the past, from imagining your own breaking point. Survival now means knowing when to bend without breaking, but with Salem's guilt still raw, that's a delicate balance. You tug your cloak close, eyes on the path, and pray you never face that impossible choice. You're still in Salem Village, 1693, where the witch hunt's ghosts linger, and the village is stitching itself back together, thread by fragile thread. You're mending a torn cloak, your fingers pricked by the needle, when you start thinking about the trial's lasting impact, not just on Salem, but on justice and the way people see truth. The executions, confessions, and betrayals have left marks that won't fade, and you're wondering how this madness reshaped the world beyond the village. You're headed to the meeting house for a community gathering, hoping to hear how folks are grappling with the legacy. You'd rather be soothing a restless cow than facing these heavy truths, you joke to yourself. But understanding the trial's ripple effect might help you find your place in this healing village, and you're determined to keep steady. Inside the meeting house, the air's thick with murmurs and the scent of candle wax. The speaker, a visiting magistrate, talks of reforms. Courts now question spectral evidence, and some judges, like Samuel Sewell, have apologized. You listen, piecing it together. Salem's chaos forced a reckoning, making justice less blind to hysteria. Historically, the trials influenced legal standards, with Massachusetts banning spectral evidence by 1693 and later compensating survivors. A quirky tidbit? The term witch hunt was born here, entering English as a shorthand for baseless persecution. Talk about a lasting brand. Historians still argue whether Salem's legacy strengthened fair trials or just exposed how fragile justice can be. You shift on the pew, thinking back to the courtroom's fever, call back to Tituba's confession, where visions trumped reason. You're starting to see the trial's impact as a warning. Fear can twist truth, and courts can falter. You notice Goody Clark, her face tight, maybe recalling her own brush with suspicion, call back to her fearful whispers. You're tempted to mutter that Salem's lesson is as useful as a map after you're lost, but you stay silent. You've kept your own path clear, your actions unremarkable, call back to your survival strategies. But you're wondering how this legacy shapes you now. Can you trust justice to protect you? You ponder your role in this new Salem. The trial's shadow makes you wary, but also sharper. You question gossip, doubt quick judgments. You notice the crowd's mood, subdued, like they're all carrying the same weight. The magistrate mentions reparations for families like the nurses, call back to Goody Nurse's arrest. But no coin can undo the dead. You're starting to think the trial's true legacy is vigilance, watching for fear's return, whether in courts or hearts. The realization settles like a cold wind. Salem didn't just break, it taught the world how easily it can break again. As you leave, the dusk is soft, the village quieter but not whole. You pass the gallows' empty hill, call back to Bridget's execution, its silence a heavy reminder. You're exhausted from carrying this history, from balancing guilt and hope. Survival now means living with the trial's lessons, knowing justice can bend but must be guarded. You pull your shawl tight, eyes on the path, and pray Salem's legacy keeps the village and you from falling again.
You're still in Salem Village, 1693, where the witch hunt's wounds are slowly scabbing over, but the village remains tender. You're stacking hay in the barn, the dry stalks pricking your hands, when you start thinking about how Salem's fear mirrors panics you've heard of in whispers. Stories of modern mobs and moral crusades that feel eerily familiar. The trials may be history, but their echo resonates, and you're wondering how those old lessons apply to the world beyond 1693. You're headed to the tavern to trade some cheese and catch talk of the wider world. You'd rather be coaxing a stubborn mule than drawing these parallels, you joke to yourself, but seeing Salem's fear in today's light might help you understand its grip, and you're determined to find clarity in this fragile piece. At the tavern, the air's warm with chatter and the tang of ale. A traveler from Boston mentions recent panics, crowds turning on outsiders, blaming them for woes like disease or unrest. You listen, connecting dots. Fear still makes monsters out of neighbors, just like it did here. Historically, Salem's trials birthed the concept of witch hunts, a term now used for any frenzy targeting the innocent, from 1950s McCarthyism to modern online mobs. A quirky tidbit? In the 21st century, people still hunt witches on platforms like X, where a single post can spark a digital lynching. Talk about old wine in new bottles. Historians still argue whether these panics stem from the same human flaw, fear of the other, or if each era's unique pressures shape its own brand of hysteria. You sip your cider, thinking back to the gallows' grim weight, call back to Bridget Bishop's execution, where fear drowned reason. You're starting to see Salem's story as a mirror, reflecting how quickly trust can crumble, then or now. You notice a woman at the tavern, her eyes wary, maybe recalling her own brush with suspicion, call back to Goody Clark's fear. You're tempted to mutter that humans swap pitchforks for keyboards but keep the same old rage, but you stay silent. You've kept your own slate clean, your steps careful, call back to your survival strategies. But you're wondering how you'd fare in a modern panic. Could you stay above the fray? You ponder your place in this cycle. Salem taught you to question fear-driven mobs, to doubt snap judgments. You notice the tavern's mood, restless, like folks sense the world's still prone to the same madness. You're starting to think the trial's lesson isn't just about 1692. It's about spotting fear's spark before it ignites, whether in a village or a virtual crowd. You recall the courtroom's chaos, call back to spectral evidence, where lies became truth. The realization settles like damp straw. Fear's timeless, and only vigilance keeps it at bay.
As you head home, the dusk is cool, the village hushed but restless. You pass the meeting house, its steeple a reminder of sermons that fueled panic. Call back to Paris's preaching. You're exhausted from carrying these parallels, from seeing Salem's sins in a broader light. Survival now means recognizing fear's old tricks, whether in 1693 or far beyond. You tug your cloak close, eyes on the path, and pray you can spot the next panic before it sweeps you away. You're still in Salem Village, 1693, where the witch hunt scars are softening, but the village carries its lessons like a heavy shawl. You're tending a small fire, the embers glowing as dusk settles, when you start thinking about healing. How a place so torn can mend, how trust can grow again. The trials are over, the gallows silent, and you're imagining a Salem where neighbors share bread, not blame. You're headed to a community supper, a rare gathering meant to knit the village closer. You'd rather be soothing a restless hen than facing these cautious faces, you joke to yourself, but rebuilding trust is the final step to surviving Salem, and you're ready to try. At the supper, trestle tables line the meeting house yard, lit by lanterns. Folks pass bread and cider, their smiles tentative but real. Goody Clark, once so wary, offers you a slice of apple pie, her eyes softer now. You see it. Small gestures, shared meals, are stitching Salem back together. Historically, by the late 1690s, Salem began to heal. Families reconciled, and public apologies, like Ann Putnam's Jr. in 1706, eased some wounds.
A quirky tidbit, some villagers planted witch hazel shrubs, believing they'd ward off evil, nature as a hopeful charm. Historians still argue whether Salem's healing was genuine or just a weary truce to move forward. You sit, savoring the pie, and think back to the jail's grim cells, call back to that reeking prison, where trust was a luxury. Now you're sharing a table with folks who once whispered accusations. You notice Goody Proctor laughing with a neighbor, a sound you haven't heard in months, call back to her betrayal. You're tempted to mutter that mending hearts is tougher than mending fences, but you smile instead. You've kept your own walls high, your steps careful, call back to your survival strategies, but tonight you're letting them down, just a bit, to join this fragile hope. You ponder your role in this healing. Can you forgive the accusers, like the Putnams, or forget the gallows weight, call back to Bridget's execution? You're no saint, but you offer a nod, pass a dish, and feel the village breathe easier. The supper's mood is warm, like embers glowing steady. You're starting to think healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about building something new, one small act at a time. The realization settles gently, like dusk's light. Salem's not whole, but it's trying, and so are you. As you leave, the night is calm, stars pricking the sky. You pass the meeting house, its steeple now a quiet sentinel, call back to Paris's sermons. You're tired, but it's a good tired, born of hope, not fear. The village hums softly, its wounds fading into scars. You pull your shawl close, feeling lighter, and head home, ready for rest. The fire's embers fade now, their warmth lingering in the quiet night. You're safe in Salem, the village settling into a gentle rhythm. Crickets hum, a soft breeze carries the scent of pine, and the stars above seem to whisper peace. The trial's shadows are slipping away, like mist dissolving in morning light. You've walked through fear, betrayal, and healing, and you're still here, stronger for it. Let the village's calm wrap around you, easing your heart with every slow breath. The meeting house stands silent, its steeple no longer looming, just watching over a town learning to trust again. Close your eyes, feel the blanket's weight, and let the hum of this night carry you to a place of rest. You've survived, and Salem's finding its way. Sleep now, deeply, carried by the quiet hope of a new day.